start a new single view application project. Click on the main storyboard file and you'll see the default view controller that was created. Highlight the view controller by tapping on it and hit delete to remove it from the storyboard. Select the view controller header and implementation files that were automatically created by Xcode and again hit delete and move them to the trash. We're going to be creating our own custom view controllers, so we won't need those. Okay, click on the main storyboard again and we want to drag out a navigation controller. By default, Xcode assumes that our root view controller will be a table view. So select the entire view controller and hit delete to remove it from the storyboard. Now drag a new view controller from the object library out into the storyboard and control-click on the navigation controller across to the new view controller and create a new relationship segue. So by selecting root view controller. This will be the initial scene that loads in the app. Now we're going to add custom view controller class for this scene. We're going to name it Boo View Controller and add it to our project. Xcode created our custom view controllers and stubbed out some of the methods that we might use. Back in Interface Builder, we select our view controller to set the custom class. This will allow Interface Builder to know what custom view controller composes the scene. Now we'll set some of our custom view controllers' main views properties to make this more distinguishable in StoryBoard. We'll add a UI label with default text Boo. Since we're using storyboards and not a nib file, we can erase the init with nib name method that Xcode has put inside of our custom view controller. We'll add a log statement to let us know when our view loads and run it. To maximize our screen real estate, we're going to go into the simulated metrics of our view controllers and set them to be the 3.5-inch full screen iPhone size. This will allow us to get more of each of the scenes onto the storyboard on our screen. Now we're going to add a new custom view controller into our storyboard. We'll add a UI label that says Pika. And we're going to set the storyboard ID to Peak View Controller. This will allow us to get a reference to this particular scene in our code. We'll create a custom UI view controller called Peak View Controller. Again, since we're not using a nib file, we can delete the init with nib name method. Back in our Boo view controller, we're going to use that storyboard ID to get a reference to our newly added view controller. Using the method instantiate view controller with identifier, we can get a reference back to the view controller in our storyboard. Next, we're going to call present view controller Next, we're going to call present view controller with additional arguments animated and a completion block. Next, we're going to call method present view controller animated completion, which will present this view controller and give us the option to execute a completion block after it's done. The animated flag allows us to set whether or not it will use an animation to present itself. Since we're using this as a splash screen and we want this to present before the Boo view controller, we will set it to no. Next, we're going to declare a private class extension method called dismissPeakViewController. This is the method that we will call to remove the splash screen peak view controller. So we implement it. We're going to call dismissViewController, animated, and again with a completion block. In this case, simply a log statement. In order to trigger this method, we are going to use the method performSelector with object after delay in the completion block of our presentViewController method. So after 1.5 seconds, the method dismissPocketViewController will be fired. Let's hit run and see what happens. To give it more of a splash screen effect, we'll change the transition style to cross dissolve. We're going to add one more additional custom UI view controller. We're going to give this a storyboard ID of face view controller and add our custom implementation and header files. We'll set our custom class to face view controller so that we can access it programmatically. Next, let's drag out a UI button onto our Boo View controller. We're going to command click and drag it over to our new view controller. And this will give us the option of creating an action segue. In this case, we want to create a push action segue. Now tapping on the button will transition to the new view controller. We'll add a label to our new view controller just so that we can differentiate it and see when it's presented. Click on the segue and look at the property inspector. We'll set the identifier to be segue to face view controller. Now if we run it, when we click on the button, we can see that we transition to the next view controller without having to write any additional code. For demonstration purposes, we'll add another button to trigger this programmatically. So we'll add a new UI button to our scene. and we will create an action. We'll call it tap to face view controller. We'll type UI button. It'll create the method declaration for us. Again, we'll use the instantiate view controller with identifier to get a reference to our face view controller, managed by StoryBoard. Now we're going to tell our navigation controller to push this new view controller, and again we have the option to set an animated flag. So now when we run it, we can see the transition using our segue, or triggering the segue programmatically loads the same view controller just in a different way. Finally, to make our app a little more exciting, we're going to add a couple image resources to make our face view controller display a very surprised face during the game of peekaboo. We'll add a UI image view to our face view controller. And using the property attributes, set the default image to be Mr. Bill. We're going to add additional image resources so that we can select different faces at runtime. In our face view controller, we're going to create an outlet for the UI image view so we can access it programmatically. And then in our viewed will appear method, we're going to write a little logic to randomly select from one set of image or the other. Peekaboo.